The summer of 1979 in Maplewood, Pennsylvania, was warm and peaceful. It was the kind of small American town where people left their doors unlocked and waved to each other while driving down the main street. Families gathered at the local diner for breakfast on weekends, and the most exciting news was usually about the high school baseball team. Life moved slowly here, and that was how the people liked it. The Thompson family had lived in Maplewood for nearly 10 years. Their white two-story farmhouse sat on the edge of town, surrounded by a wide field that Richard Thompson used for gardening. Richard was 42, a quiet and dependable man who worked as a mechanic. He had strong hands, a warm smile, and a habit of humming old country songs while fixing cars. His wife Elaine was 39, known for her kindness and love of baking. She often brought fresh pies to neighbors and never missed Sunday church. Together, they had 2 children, Michael, a 14-year-old who loved baseball and dreamed of becoming a pitcher, and Anna, an 11-year-old who adored drawing and had a notebook filled with sketches of animals and flowers. They also had 2 friendly dogs, Max and Daisy, who followed the children everywhere. The family's life was simple but happy. They weren't rich, but they had each other, and in Maplewood, that was enough. On the evening of August 14th, 1979, everything seemed normal. Neighbors saw Richard mowing the lawn, waving to passing cars. Elaine was in the kitchen, preparing dinner. Michael and Anna played catch in the yard, their laughter echoing across the field. The sun set in shades of orange and gold, and soon, lights in the Thompson house flickered on. To anyone watching, it was just another peaceful summer night in Maplewood. But the next morning, August 15th, things were different. Mrs. Grady, who lived across the road, stepped outside to feed her chickens and noticed the Thompson house was unusually still. Normally, she would see Richard leaving for work or the kids heading to the bus stop. But that morning, the curtains were drawn. There was no movement inside. At first, she thought maybe they had gone on a trip. But then she heard the dogs barking. Not just playful barking, but sharp, restless barks that didn't stop. They were outside in the backyard, scratching at the fence. Mrs. Grady frowned. The Thompsons loved their dogs and never left them. Out for long, especially in the morning heat, curious and a little uneasy. Mrs. Grady walked across the road and knocked on the front door. No answer. She knocked again, louder this time. Still nothing. She tried the doorbell, but there was no sound of footsteps inside. She looked through the small window by the door. The living room appeared untouched. A cup on the coffee table. A blanket thrown over the couch arm. Everything looked normal, but strangely frozen, like time had stopped. She walked around the house and called out, "Elaine, Richard, kids?" The dogs barked louder, tails wagging but eyes nervous. She peered through the kitchen window and saw something that made her pause. Breakfast plates sat on the table, each with food still on them. A glass of milk was halfway full. It was as if the family had been eating and simply stood up and walked away. Mrs. Grady hurried back home and called the local sheriff. Within an hour, a patrol car pulled up in front of the Thompson home. Sheriff Dale Parker, a tall man with years of experience in quiet town policing, stepped out with his deputy. They knocked several times, then decided to enter through the unlocked back door. Inside, the house felt oddly silent. The air was still, but there was a faint smell of coffee, as if it had been brewed that very morning. The kitchen table was set for 4, plates partially eaten, milk starting to sour in the summer heat. One plate even had a fork resting mid-bite on scrambled eggs. They checked the bedrooms. The beds were unmade. Michael's baseball cap was tossed on his desk, and Anna's sketchbook lay open on her bed, with a half-finished drawing of a deer. Clothes were left on the floor, a dresser drawer partly open. In Richard and Elaine's room, the alarm clock still blinked the time, and Elaine's reading glasses were on the nightstand. There were no signs of forced entry. No broken locks, no shattered windows. The family's car, a green station wagon, was parked in the driveway. Wallets, handbags, and keys were all inside the house. The sheriff and his deputy walked from room to room, calling out the family's names. The only reply came from Max and Daisy outside, barking as if asking for help. In the living room, Sheriff Parker paused. He had seen many things in his career, domestic disputes, the occasional theft, but nothing like this. as if the family had been caught in the middle of an ordinary morning and vanished into thin air by midday. News spread quickly through Maplewood. People gathered near the property, speaking in hushed voices. Some offered to help search the fields. Others brought food for the dogs. A search team was organized, combing through the nearby woods, checking the creek, and even searching abandoned barns. But there was no trace of the Thompsons. When night fell, the farmhouse sat in eerie silence, lit only by the moon. Inside, the untouched breakfast remained on the table, a quiet reminder that something very wrong had happened. No one in Maplewood could understand it. People went to bed that night, locking their doors for the first time in years, wondering if what happened to the Thompson family could happen to them too. And so, on that warm August day in 1979, the simple peace of Maplewood shattered, replaced by a mystery that would haunt the town for decades to come. The disappearance of the Thompson family quickly became the biggest event Maplewood had ever seen. The quiet farming town used to slow, predictable days now found itself buzzing with worry and speculation. The morning after the sheriff's first visit, the local police organized an official search. Dozens of volunteers, farmers, store owners, even high school students gathered to help. Sheriff Parker stood on the porch of the Thompson house, giving instructions. "We'll cover the woods, the old quarry, and both sides of the creek. Look for anything, clothing, footprints, anything unusual. And stay together in your groups." The volunteers fanned out in different directions. Some moved through tall grass, others combed through barns and sheds. The dogs barked and sniffed at the air, but nothing was found. By evening, the search returned empty-handed. The next day, the case took a bigger turn. The FBI arrived. For a town like Maplewood, this was unheard of. Black government cars rolled into town, and agents in dark suits stepped out, carrying files and cameras. People watched from their porches, whispering to each other. The arrival of the FBI meant one thing. This was no longer a simple missing persons case. Special Agent Thomas Riley, a calm man with sharp eyes, introduced himself to the sheriff. He explained that the sudden disappearance of an entire family, without any trace, was rare and serious. "We need to treat this as both a missing persons and potential criminal investigation," he said. The agents began their work immediately. They took photographs of every room in the Thompson home, dusted surfaces for fingerprints, and collected the half-eaten breakfast as evidence. Even bagged up Elaine's reading glasses and Anna's sketchbook. Every little thing might be a clue. Neighbors were interviewed one by one. Most had seen nothing unusual, but a few details stood out. Mrs. Grady repeated what she had told the sheriff: the barking dogs, the untouched breakfast, and the locked stillness of the house. Another neighbor, Mr. Harris, mentioned something curious. 2 nights before the family vanished, he had been up late fixing his tractor when he heard the sound of a vehicle idling somewhere down the road. Didn't think much of it at the time, he said, but it was late. Too late for visitors. A young paperboy recalled delivering the newspaper on the morning of the disappearance and noticing the curtains were closed. Something, he said, was not normal for the Thompsons. When the FBI agents checked Richard's small home office, they discovered a stack of handwritten letters tucked away in a desk drawer. They were short, written on plain paper, and signed with only initials. The handwriting didn't match Richard's or Elaine's. The letters spoke vaguely about plans, keeping quiet, and making sure the money was safe. There were no dates, no return address. Agent Riley's team quickly sent the letters to a lab for analysis, hoping they might reveal fingerprints or even a clue about the writer. Meanwhile, the search for the family spread beyond Maplewood. Police and volunteers searched miles of woodland, drained a nearby pond, and sent photos of the Thompsons to towns across the state. The family's details were broadcast on local radio and shown on evening news programs. People were urged to report any possible sightings. A few tips came in. Someone in the next county claimed to have seen a man who looked like Richard at a gas station, but security footage was too blurry to confirm. A waitress in a diner thought she had served a woman resembling Elaine, but when shown a photograph, she hesitated, saying, "Maybe, but I'm not sure." Weeks passed. The excitement and panic that had gripped Maplewood slowly shifted into a heavy silence. The Thompson house remained exactly as it had been the day they disappeared. Curtains drawn, car in the driveway, breakfast dishes still sitting in police storage. Inside the FBI's temporary office in town. Agent Riley studied the caseboard. There were photographs of the family, a hand-drawn map of the search areas, and notes from interviews. But the board was filled with more questions than answers. There was no sign of forced entry, no ransom note, no known enemies, and no clear reason for the Thompsons to leave on their own. As days turned into weeks, the mood in Maplewood began to change. People no longer stood in groups on the street corner discussing theories. Instead, they locked their doors earlier, drew their curtains at night, and avoided walking alone. The once cheerful chatter at the diner grew quieter, replaced by nervous glances. For the Thompson relatives, the uncertainty was the hardest part. Elaine's sister, Margaret, drove in from another state to speak with the investigators. She insisted the family would never leave voluntarily. Richard was steady, dependable. Elaine loved this town and the kids. They had school friends, dreams. They wouldn't just walk away. The FBI dug deeper into Richard's past. They learned he had once invested money in a small trucking company with an old friend, but the business had failed. There were rumors of disputes over unpaid debts, but no hard proof of anything criminal. Still, the detail was enough to keep investigators wondering if someone from Richard's past could be connected to the disappearance. In early September, the FBI brought in tracking dogs from another state. The dogs picked up faint scents from inside the Thompson home but quickly lost the trail outside, as if the family had left in a vehicle. The lack of answers frustrated everyone. Each passing day made the mystery stranger. People in town whispered about wild possibilities, from secret debts to witness protection programs, even to the idea of the family deciding to start over somewhere far away. But deep down, most feared something far worse had happened. By the end of the year, the search slowed. Winter came, covering the fields and woods with snow. The Thompson house stood cold and silent, the yard bare except for the wind chimes that swayed with the winter breeze. And though official searches had stopped for the season, the mystery remained alive in people's minds. It was no longer just a missing persons case. It had become a shadow over Maplewood, a story that parents told their children when warning them to be careful. What no one knew then was that the answers to the Thompson family's disappearance were much closer than anyone imagined, hidden all along, waiting to be uncovered decades later. The years after the disappearance of the Thompson family passed slowly in Maplewood. But the memory of that August morning in 1979 never faded. At first, people kept expecting new developments. Every time an unfamiliar car drove through town, or a stranger stopped at the diner, whispers would start. Maybe they were connected. Maybe this was the break everyone had been waiting for. But weeks turned into months, and months into years, and nothing changed. The Thompson farmhouse stood on the edge of town like a silent witness. After the FBI finished their work, the property was eventually released back to the bank. For years, no one wanted to buy it. People said it felt strange inside, as if the air itself held the memory of that day. When the wind blew through the empty rooms, it sounded like quiet footsteps in the mid-1980s. A young couple bought the house, hoping to start fresh. They repainted the walls, replaced the curtains, and tried to make it their home. But after only 2 years, they sold it and left town. The wife later told a neighbor she often felt uneasy, especially in the garage. "It's just a feeling," she had said, "but it's like someone's watching." Over the decades, the house had several owners. Some stayed only months, others a few years. No one could ever quite settle there. The garage, in particular, was a place few liked to be. People described it as cold, even in summer. The FBI had kept the Thompson case open, but it was considered cold, meaning there were no new leads to follow. Every few years, a new agent would be assigned to review the old files. They would read through the witness statements, look over the photos, and recheck the letters found in Richard's desk. But without fresh evidence, the case always ended. Back in the archive room, Margaret, Elaine's sister, never stopped asking questions. Every Christmas, she wrote a letter to the FBI's Missing Persons Unit, asking if there had been any updates. She kept every reply, most of them short. Polite notes saying there was no new information. She stored them in a small box under her bed, along with old photographs of the Thompsons smiling on family picnics. Sometimes, Margaret would drive to Maplewood just to stand outside the house. She said it helped her feel close to them, even if she knew they weren't coming back in the early 2000s. Technology had advanced, and old cases began to be re-examined with new tools. That year, Michael's high school friend, now an adult, posted old yearbook photos of him online, along with a short message, "Still missing since 1979. If you know anything, contact authorities." One of the replies caught attention. A man in Texas claimed he had seen someone who looked like Richard in a roadside diner in 1982. The man said he remembered because the person was quiet and seemed nervous, glancing at the door often. The FBI looked into it, but by the time they tracked down old diner employees and records, there was nothing to confirm the story. It was just another possible lead that went nowhere. Meanwhile, Maplewood had changed. The children who had once whispered about the Thompson mystery grew up, moved away, and started families of their own. They would still glance toward the farmhouse and remember local teenagers sometimes dared each other to walk up to the property at night. They would tell each other ghost stories about the Thompsons, inventing wild theories to make the mystery even stranger. But deep down, everyone knew the truth was probably not supernatural. It was something human, something that had been hidden very carefully. The Thompson case became part of the town's identity. It was mentioned in local history books, covered in small newspaper articles every few years, and even featured once on a radio show about unsolved mysteries. But as time went on, fewer people believed the case would ever be solved. Margaret, now in her 70s, still hoped for answers. "I just need to know," she often said. "Even if it's bad news, I need to know what happened." No one realized was that the key to solving the mystery had been sitting in plain sight, all along, right there on the Thompson property. But because the original search had been limited by the technology of the 1970s, no one had found it. In 2019, the FBI launched a new cold case initiative. A small group of agents began reviewing old missing persons files with fresh eyes. They had access to tools the original investigators could only dream of: advanced DNA testing, digital mapping, and ground-penetrating radar. The Thompson case was one of hundreds reviewed. At first, it seemed like another dead end. The old reports told the same story. No forced entry, no signs of struggle, personal belongings left behind. The letters in Richard's desk still carried no fingerprints, and no one had ever decoded their meaning. But in 2024, something changed. A young forensic analyst on the team noticed a detail in the old crime scene photos. A slight difference in the concrete pattern of the garage floor compared to the rest of the property. It was subtle, something easy to overlook, but two trained eyes. It suggested the floor had been patched or poured over at a different time. This small observation would soon lead to the breakthrough. Everyone had been waiting for a discovery that would finally bring the truth of the Thompsons' disappearance into the light after 45 years of silence. In early 2024, the FBI's cold case team met in a small conference room to review the Thompson disappearance once again. The case file sat thick on the table. Hundreds of pages of old reports, photographs, and interview notes. Many agents had looked at it before, but now the focus was different. Technology had advanced, and they were determined to use every new tool available. A young forensic analyst named Emily Carter was the one who spotted it. She was reviewing the original photographs taken in 1979, paying close attention to the garage. Most people saw nothing unusual: A plain concrete floor, a few oil stains, some tools in the corner. But Emily noticed something subtle. The concrete near the center looked smoother than the rest, almost as if it had been poured at a different time. She brought it up in the meeting. "Look at the edges," she said, pointing to the photo. "There's a faint line here, like the older concrete and newer concrete don't match perfectly. Back then, this might not have meant much, but it could be important." Agent Riley, now a senior advisor after decades of service, leaned forward. "That floor was redone after the disappearance. We need to know why." The team agreed. They contacted the current owner of the Thompson house, explained the situation, and requested permission to examine the property. The owner, who had only lived there a few years, agreed without hesitation. He admitted that the garage had always felt strange, colder than the rest of the house. The faint smell of dampness, even in dry weather. The first step was to bring in ground-penetrating radar. This technology could scan beneath the surface without digging. On a crisp spring morning, the FBI team arrived at the property. They set up equipment in the garage, running the radar back and forth across the floor. At first, the screen showed nothing unusual. Then, about halfway through the scan, Emily saw something large. Irregular shapes beneath the concrete, about 5 feet down. The shapes didn't match normal soil patterns. They were denser, uneven, clustered together. The team exchanged looks. They all knew what this could mean. They decided to keep the operation quiet. There would be no news crews, no public announcements. Not yet. The fewer people who knew, the better. If there was evidence under that floor, they needed to secure it without interference. The next day, specialists arrived with tools to carefully break through the concrete. The work was slow and deliberate. Piece by piece, the smooth surface of the garage floor was chipped away. Underneath, they found older soil compacted, disturbed in certain areas. When the digging began, the air in the garage changed. Even without words, everyone could feel the tension building. The silence was broken only by the sound of shovels. Scraping against the earth, about 4 feet down, the first sign appeared. A small, rusted piece of metal. At first, they thought it was just debris, but as it was cleaned, it became clear. It was part of a wristwatch. The design matched a watch listed in the original report as belonging to Michael Thompson. The digging continued. Within hours, they uncovered something no one had wanted to find, but everyone suspected might be their fragments of bone. The site was immediately secured. The FBI's forensic team stepped in, carefully marking each find, photographing every layer of soil, and placing the remains into evidence containers. By evening, it was clear that the remains of 4 individuals had been buried under the garage, a man, a woman, and 2 children. Alongside them were personal items. Elaine's silver locket, still faintly engraved with her initials, on a small school backpack, the fabric faded but intact, and a baseball keychain that Michael had been known to carry, near the edge of the burial site. The team also discovered a revolver, old, rusted, and covered in dirt. The serial number was partially visible. When checked, it matched a report from months before the disappearance, a gun stolen from a nearby town. As the evidence was collected, the reality of the moment settled over the agents. The mystery that had haunted Maplewood for 4 years was no longer a question of where. Now it was a question of why and who. The FBI worked late into the night. The remains were transported to a lab for DNA testing and analysis. Ballistics experts began examining the revolver to see if it could still yield information about its last use. Every item was cataloged, photographed, and stored. The next day, Agent Riley called Margaret, Elaine's sister. His voice was calm. "But heavy, we've found something," he said. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Margaret's voice trembled. "Is it them?" He told her they couldn't confirm until DNA results came back, but the evidence strongly suggested it was the Thompson family. Word spread quietly through Maplewood, though no official statement had been made yet. People who had lived in the town for decades felt a mixture of shock, sadness, and an odd sense of relief. For years they had wondered if the Thompsons were alive somewhere. Now it seemed they had been in the same place all along, hidden. Beneath the ground of their own home, investigators turned their attention to one name from the original, 1979 interviews, a man who had worked as the Thompsons' handyman in the months before they vanished. Several neighbors had mentioned him at the time. He had been seen doing odd jobs at the house, sometimes late into the evening. The records showed that he had left town suddenly, right after the disappearance. He never came back, and his whereabouts remained unknown for years. Digging deeper, the FBI found that he had used multiple false names and had moved across several states. Eventually, they discovered he had died in 2010 in a small Montana town, leaving no immediate family. It was a frustrating discovery. The one person who might have explained everything was gone. But the physical evidence, the stolen gun, and his sudden disappearance painted a picture the investigators could not ignore. The FBI prepared to make their findings public. They knew it would bring both closure and heartbreak to the people of Maplewood, especially to Margaret, who had spent nearly half her life waiting for answers. The day was coming when the truth, buried for 4.5 decades, would finally be revealed. When it was, it would shake not only the small town, but everyone who had ever followed the case. Thought for 18S. The DNA results came back on a quiet morning a few weeks after the excavation. The lab moved carefully, step by step, checking and double-checking every sample. When the confirmation finally reached the cold case team, no one cheered. They just sat still for a moment, letting the truth settle in. The remains under the garage were Richard, Elaine, Michael, and Anna. The question of where had been answered at last. He spoke slowly and with care. He told her that results were final and that the personal items found at the site would be returned to her after the paperwork was complete. On the other end, Margaret did not cry at first. She said thank you in a small voice. And then she asked the question that had lived in her heart for 45 years. Did they suffer? Riley answered honestly but gently. He explained that the medical examiners believed their passing had been quick, based on the evidence they could see. He offered to meet with her in person to explain more, and she agreed. 2 days later, the FBI held a press conference at the Maplewood Community Center. The room was simple folding chairs, a wooden podium, a row of local reporters with notebooks, and cameras. Behind the podium was a board with the timeline of the investigation, old photographs of the Thompson family, and a map of the property. The town had waited decades for this moment, and now, many of the people who had searched the woods in 1979 were gray-haired and moving a little slower. But they came anyway. Agent Riley stepped up to the podium. He started with the facts. The remains were identified through modern DNA testing. Personal items found at the scene matched those listed in the original 1979 reports: a silver locket with initials, a watch, a child's small backpack, and a keychain. A weapon had been recovered as well, and early tests showed it matched one. That had been reported stolen months before the family disappeared. The examiners believed the family had passed away in the late summer of 1979. Close to the date they were last seen, there were no graphic details. The team chose their words with care. They knew this was not just a case file. It was a family. In a town that had been hurting for a long time, then came the part everyone had feared but expected. Investigators believed a person who had done odd jobs for the Thompsons in 1979 was likely responsible. Neighbors had seen him around the property. Records showed he left town right after the family vanished and lived under different names in other states. He had passed away in 2010. The team did not announce his name publicly that day. They explained that while the evidence strongly pointed in his direction, there would be no trial, no chance to ask him why. At truth, no chance to hear his voice, no chance to hear a reason, was heavy. Reporters asked careful questions. Was there a motive? The agents said they could not say for sure. There were hints in the old letters found in Richard's desk notes about plans, money, and keeping quiet, but there was no final proof of who had written them. Was there anyone else involved? The team said there was no clear sign of that. The concrete in the garage had been poured quickly, likely within days of the family's disappearance. The original search, done with the tools of 1979, would not have caught what modern equipment had revealed. After the press conference, people did not rush out. They stood in groups, speaking in low voices. Some had been teenagers at the time. The family vanished. While they were grandparents, and they shared memories Michael's strong arm on the school baseball field. Anna's drawings taped to the classroom wall, Elaine's pies cooling on a windowsill, Richard's easy way with a stubborn engine. The memory of the family felt bright and close again, but in a soft way, the way sunlight falls through a window in late afternoon. A week later, Maplewood held a memorial service. The church was full. A gentle choir sang simple songs, and the pastor spoke about patience, kindness, and the long road of unanswered questions. The front of the church held 4 framed photographs and a small table with their personal items. The silver locket caught the light. The watch lay next to a neatly folded handkerchief. The backpack, carefully cleaned by the lab, sat beside a small sketchbook placed there by someone who remembered Anna's love of drawing. On the way out, a former teammate left a baseball near the steps. He whispered, "For you, buddy," and walked away with tears he did not try to hide. Margaret chose to bury the family together. The headstones were simple and elegant names. Dates and a short line that read, "Always loved, always found." People came in a steady line throughout the day, some leaving flowers, some leaving notes, and many standing in silence. Margaret stayed until evening. She spoke softly to each of them as if speaking across the years, telling them about birthdays that were missed, holidays that felt quieter, and the letters she had written every Christmas. "I never stopped looking," she said, "not for a single day." Back at the FBI office, the team closed the active part of the file, but did not shove it into a dark cabinet. They wrote a full report, not only about the discovery, but also about the lessons learned. It recorded how ground-penetrating radar made the difference, how the careful review of old photographs pointed to the garage, and how patience and respect for small details opened a locked door. The report would live in training rooms and on the desks of new agents, teaching them to look again and look closer, especially when the past has gone quiet. The town began to heal in small, practical ways. The current owner of the Thompson house chose to sell the property. He said he wanted a family to live there who knew the full story and could start fresh. A local couple bought it, not out of curiosity, but out of care. They planned a quiet garden where the garage once cast a shadow. They planted 4 young trees in a line, one for each member of the family. Children rode their bikes past the house again. Birds returned to the maple in front. The wind sounded like the wind again. At the high school, the principal announced a scholarship in the Thompson children's names. It would support students who loved art and sports because that was who Michael and Anna had been. In the art room, a small plaque was hung for Anna, who loved to draw what she could see and what she hoped to see. At the baseball field, the coach placed a simple marker near the dugout for Michael, who threw with strength and heart. National news mentioned the case for a day or two, but for Maplewood, it was not a headline. It was a change of weather. Long storm of not knowing gave way to a clear, steady light. People still told the story to newcomers, but the tone was different now. It was not a tale meant to frighten. It was a reminder to care for one another, to ask gentle questions, to notice when something is off, and to keep going when the path is unclear. One afternoon, Margaret met Agent Riley at the cemetery. They walked slowly between rows until they reached the family's resting place. She thanked him for not giving up. He nodded and said the work was shared by many hands analysts lab. Techs officers who searched fields long ago, and neighbors who never let the story fade. He handed her a small box. Inside were the items the lab had cleared for return: the locket, the watch, and the keychain. She touched each one, smiling through tears. "They're home," she said. As summer turned to fall, Maplewood felt like itself again, but wiser. People still laughed at the diner, still waved from trucks, still helped when a fence fell or an engine would not start. Yet there was a new habit too. When someone did not show up where they were expected, a call was made sooner. When a friend was quiet, someone asked how they were really doing. The town had learned that care is not loud, it is steady. In the end, there were things the investigation could not fill in: words never spoken, minutes never recorded, a motive that could only be guessed from faint traces in old notes. But the family had been found. Their names were spoken out loud again, not as a mystery, but as people who lived, loved, and were loved. That mattered more than anything. On a clear evening, Margaret visited the new garden at the old house. For young trees were small but straight, with leaves that fluttered in the breeze. She stood there for a long time, listening to the ordinary sounds of a town at peace. Before she left, she placed her hand on the nearest tree and said, "Rest, now." Then she walked back to her car, the sky turning soft and gold, and drove home knowing that the long wait was finally over.